First contact and miscalculation. The Xantari Confederation had catalogued over 3,000 spacefaring civilizations across the galaxy. Some were ancient, with technologies that bordered on the divine. Others were young, their first tentative steps into the void marked by crude chemical rockets and primitive orbital habitats. All had been carefully observed, studied, and, when the time was right, welcomed into the galactic community. Earth was meant to be just another routine incorporation. Ambassador Xeltharim stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Harmonious Exchange, his forearms clasped in the traditional posture of contemplative preparation. The vessel's cloaking technology had kept them hidden in Earth's orbit for 6 standard cycles, more than enough time to assess humanity's technological capabilities and sociopolitical structure. Ambassador, we have completed our analysis, reported his chief intelligence officer, Varys. The small, avian-like alien's feather crests fluttered with excitement. The humans have achieved spaceflight, but their technology is rudimentary. They have yet to establish permanent settlements beyond their moon. Their computational systems are still based on silicon architecture. Their weapons primarily employ chemical propellants and limited nuclear fission. Xeltharim's mouthparts clicked thoughtfully. And their political structure? Fragmented, Varys answered dismissively. Thousands of competing factions organized into approximately 200 territorial units they call nations. They appear incapable of planetary consensus. How quaint, Xeltharim mused. They're at the perfect stage for contact. Advanced enough to comprehend our existence, but not so advanced that they could pose any threat. Prepare the standard dominance display. We'll give them a proper introduction to the cosmos. The standard protocol for species at humanity's development stage was straightforward. Emerge from stealth dramatically, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, and offer protection and advancement in exchange for resources and allegiance to the Confederation. It had worked flawlessly for millennia. Disengaging cloaking field, announced the navigation officer. The massive diplomatic vessel, over 3 kilometers in length, materialized above Earth's northern hemisphere. Its hull shimmered with iridescent energies, designed specifically to awe primitive species. Xeltharim ordered the ship to broadcast the first contact message on all electromagnetic frequencies. People of Earth, his carefully modulated voice boomed. I am Ambassador Xeltharim of the Xantari Confederation, an alliance of civilizations spanning this galaxy. We have observed your development and deem you worthy of acknowledgement. We offer you the opportunity to join our community and benefit from our guidance. In exchange, we require only your loyalty and a modest tribute of your planetary resources. The message was designed to be simultaneously intimidating and enticing, establishing the power dynamic from the outset. Xeltharim settled back, expecting the usual panicked responses, hurried global conferences, and eventually, compliance. What happened instead would forever change galactic history. Just 4 Earth hours after the transmission, the ship's sensors detected multiple launches from Earth's surface. Hundreds of them, rising from oceans, continents, and even the planet's polar regions. Ambassador, Varys called, his voice uncharacteristically strained. The humans are deploying vessels. As expected, Xeltharim replied calmly. They're likely sending representatives from their major factions. Prepare the reception chambers. Varys nervously adjusted his display. Sir, these are not diplomatic craft. They appear to be military vessels. And there are many of them. Xeltharim frowned and moved to the observation platform. What he saw defied all intelligence reports. Rising to meet the Harmonious Exchange was a coordinated fleet of spacecraft, sleek, angular vessels that moved with precision and purpose. They were arranging themselves in a perfect hemispherical formation around his ship, cutting off potential escape vectors. That's impossible, he breathed. Their technological assessment indicated nothing like this capacity. The tactical officer's voice was tight. Ambassador, we're detecting advanced propulsion systems, fusion drives, and their hulls. They're composed of metamaterial composites we haven't seen before. They're scanning us, another crew member reported. Penetrating scans. They're mapping our entire vessel. Gazeltharim felt the first stirrings of unease. Open a channel. I need to speak to whoever's in command. Before the communications officer could comply, the ship's systems suddenly faltered. Lights dimmed, displays flickered, and a momentary sensation of weightlessness swept through the bridge. What's happening? Gazeltharim demanded. They've deployed some kind of dampening field, the tactical officer replied, voice rising in alarm. Our primary systems are being suppressed. Defensive capabilities at 30% and dropping. This was unprecedented. No species at humanity's supposed level of development should possess such technology. Gazeltharim's confidence was rapidly giving way to confusion and the first tendrils of fear. A new voice filled the bridge, calm, measured, and speaking in perfect Centauri. Ambassador Gazeltharim, this is Admiral Helena Nakamura of the United Earth Defense Force. Your vessel has entered restricted space without permission. Your transmission has been interpreted as a threat to our sovereignty. You will power down all offensive systems immediately and prepare to receive our delegation. Any hostile action will be met with proportional response. The bridge fell silent. The humans had not only understood the Centauri language, but had responded in kind, without the aid of the translation matrix. And they had spoken not as a fragmented collection of nations, but as a unified planet. United Earth Defense Force. Gazeltharim whispered. The intelligence report indicated no such organization. Varys was frantically reviewing data. Sir, I believe we've been deceived. These aren't disparate nations launching independently. This is a coordinated planetary defense system. And those aren't merely spacecraft. They're warships. On the tactical display, Gazeltharim watched in growing horror as hundreds more vessels emerged from hidden bases on Earth's moon, from Mars, and from what appeared to be camouflaged stations in the asteroid belt. The human fleet wasn't just large. It was enormous, diverse, and deployed with strategic precision that suggested centuries of military evolution. Ambassador, the tactical officer reported, we're detecting weapons locks from multiple vessels. Energy readings indicate directed plasma weapons, kinetic railguns, and something else we can't identify. Gazeltharim's respiratory sacs constricted in panic. The Confederation protocol for first contact had never accounted for this scenario. A seemingly primitive species revealing itself to be a concealed military power. Sir, what are your orders? Asked the first officer. The ambassador stared at the approaching human vessels, their designs varied yet clearly products of a unified technological vision. He thought of the thousands of civilizations the Confederation had subjugated using the same approach he had just attempted. He thought of how the humans had hidden their true capabilities, allowed themselves to be underestimated, and then revealed their strength at the perfect moment. Open a channel, he said finally, his voice barely audible. Tell Admiral Nakamura that we wish to establish peaceful diplomatic relations, not as patrons, but as... The words felt foreign in his mouth. As equals. As the human ships drew closer, Ambassador Gazeltharim realized that the galaxy had just become a very different place. The Centauri Confederation had unwittingly awakened not a primitive civilization ripe for exploitation, but a sleeping giant that had been watching the stars and preparing for far longer than anyone had suspected. Diplomacy under pressure. The conference room aboard the Harmonious Exchange had been designed to intimidate. Its soaring ceilings, holographic displays of conquered worlds, and the elevated position of the Centauri delegation were all calculated to reinforce the Confederation's superiority. Today, those same features seemed hollow, even desperate. Ambassador Gazeltharim adjusted his ceremonial robes nervously as the human delegation was escorted in. He had expected a chaotic group of representatives from Earth's various nations. Instead, he faced a small, disciplined team of 5 humans, each wearing the same dark blue uniform with minimal distinctions in rank. Admiral Helena Nakamura led them. She was shorter than Xeltherim had expected from the imposing voice he'd heard, but her presence filled the room more effectively than his own 4-meter height. Behind her walked 3 officers, 2 men and 1 woman, each carrying only a small data tablet. The 5th member of the delegation was a weathered older man in a slightly different uniform, his chest adorned with symbols that Xeltherim's cultural database identified as indicating scientific achievement rather than military rank. "Ambassador," Nakamura said, inclining her head slightly. "Thank you for agreeing to these discussions." Agreeing, Xeltherim thought bitterly, as if he'd had a choice with 500 human warships surrounding his vessel. "Admiral," he responded, matching her nod. "Please, be seated." The humans took their places at the conference table with practiced efficiency. Xeltherim noted with discomfort that they showed no awe at the advanced technology around them. No wonder at being aboard an alien vessel. They behaved as if interstellar diplomatic meetings were routine. "I believe we should address the miscommunication that has occurred," Xeltherim began carefully. "The Xantari Confederation meant no disrespect with our approach. It is simply our standard protocol for initiating contact with newly discovered spacefaring civilizations." Admiral Nakamura's expression remained neutral. "Your protocol involved entering our system unannounced, conducting covert surveillance, and then demanding our submission. On Earth, we might characterize such actions differently." The older man beside her, Dr. Elias Cohen, according to the introductions, spoke up. "What puzzles us, Ambassador, is the profound gap between your intelligence on humanity and our actual capabilities. This suggests either catastrophic failure in your reconnaissance or," he paused meaningfully, "or deliberate deception by someone." Xeltherim felt his neck ridges flush with embarrassment. The human had struck directly at the question that had been tormenting him since the fleet's appearance. How had the Confederation's intelligence been so wrong? "We are investigating that discrepancy," he admitted. "It is unprecedented." "Perhaps not entirely," said Lieutenant Commander Chang, one of Nakamura's officers. He activated a holographic display of his own, another shock to Xeltherim, who hadn't expected the humans to possess compatible technology. "We've been monitoring Confederation communications for some time. This isn't the first instance where your intelligence about a species was manipulated, though it may be the most dramatic." The display showed intercepted Xantari transmissions dating back decades, along with analysis of contact patterns with other civilizations. Xeltherim stared in disbelief. The humans hadn't just prepared defenses, they'd been studying the Confederation itself. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our communications are encrypted with quantum algorithms." Dr. Cohen smiled thinly. "We cracked those algorithms 30 years ago, Ambassador. But that's not important right now. What matters is that someone wants the Confederation and Earth to become enemies, and we need to determine who and why." Xeltherim's mind raced. If the humans were telling the truth, it meant that the Confederation had been manipulated into a potentially catastrophic first contact scenario. But who would have both the capability and motivation to do such a thing? "The Krell Dominion," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. Admiral Nakamura nodded. "Our analysis points to the same conclusion. The Krell have been isolated since their attempt to challenge Confederation authority 3 centuries ago. They would benefit significantly from a conflict between Earth and the Xantari." The implications were staggering. The Krell Dominion, a species of ruthless pragmatists who had been contained but never truly subjugated by the Confederation, must have been watching Earth for generations. They had fed false intelligence to the Xantari, while simultaneously monitoring humanity's actual development. They had set the stage for a confrontation that would weaken both sides, preparing the way for their re-emergence as a galactic power. "If what you're saying is true," Xeltherim said slowly, "then we have both been manipulated into the opening moves of a much larger game." "Precisely," Admiral Nakamura agreed. And that puts us in an interesting position. We can either follow the path the Krell have laid out for us, become enemies, fight a war that neither of us started, or we can choose a different approach. The conference room fell silent as the implications hung in the air. Teltharim studied the humans before him. They had hidden their true nature from the galaxy, developed in isolation, and prepared for all contingencies. They had met the Confederation's attempted show of force with overwhelming response, yet were now offering a path that avoided conflict. "What do you propose, Admiral?" he asked finally. Nakamura leaned forward. "A genuine alliance, Ambassador. Not the patronage system your Confederation typically employs, but a true partnership between equals. Together, we expose the Krell manipulation to the galaxy. Together, we demonstrate that their strategy failed. The Confederation Council would never accept humanity as equals," Teltharim objected. "Our entire hierarchical structure is based on technological advancement and length of spacefaring history." "Then perhaps," Dr. Cohen suggested quietly, "it's time for that structure to evolve." Commander Rodriguez, who had remained silent until now, activated another holographic display. "This is what we know about the current state of the Krell Dominion. Their fleet movements, their technological advancements during isolation, their covert operations throughout Confederation space." The display showed an intelligence assessment far more detailed than anything the Confederation possessed. "How did you obtain this?" Teltharim asked, astonished. "We've been preparing for galactic integration for longer than you might imagine," Nakamura answered. "Humanity united decades ago, not because we settled our differences, but because we looked to the stars and understood we weren't alone. We've had stealth observation posts beyond Pluto for nearly a century. We've monitored communications, studied species, prepared contingencies, and concealed your true nature," Teltharim added. "Wouldn't you, if you saw how the Confederation treated younger species?" Commander Cheng asked pointedly. Teltharim couldn't dispute this. The Confederation's approach to galactic hierarchy had gone unchallenged for millennia. Species were classified, categorized, and assigned roles based on their perceived development level. It was efficient, but inherently unequal. "What you're suggesting would fundamentally alter the political landscape of the galaxy," he said. Admiral Nakamura smiled for the first time. "Yes, it would. The question is whether you're brave enough to help us make that change." Teltharim looked around at his staff, seeing the uncertainty in their postures and expressions. Then he looked back at the humans, confident, prepared, and offering not submission but partnership in creating something new. For a moment, he thought about the traditional response, about maintaining the Confederation's position of dominance. But the evidence was undeniable. The Krell had manipulated them all, exposing a fundamental weakness in how the Confederation operated. And these humans, these remarkable beings who had hidden their light only to reveal it at the perfect moment, were offering a way forward. "The Confederation has stood for stability in the galaxy for 12,000 years," Teltharim said slowly. "But perhaps stability without growth becomes stagnation. Perhaps it's time for transformation." He rose to his full height, towering over the seated humans, but no longer attempting to intimidate. "Admiral Nakamura, I will bring your proposal to the Confederation Council. I will advocate for this alliance of equals, and I will ensure that the Krell Dominion understands that their manipulation failed not because we were too weak, but because we were strong enough to choose cooperation over conflict." Admiral Nakamura stood as well, extending her hand in the human gesture of agreement. "Together, Ambassador, we'll show the galaxy what's possible when we set aside old hierarchies and face the future as partners." As Teltharim carefully took her small hand in his enormous one, he reflected on how differently this day had unfolded from what he had expected. He had arrived as a conqueror, only to discover that humanity had been waiting, watching, and preparing. He had come to demonstrate the Confederation's power, only to find it challenged not by force alone, but by the offer of a better way. The feared human fleet that had caused him such panic now represented not a threat, but a promise of a new order in the galaxy, one built on mutual respect rather than domination. And for the first time in his long diplomatic career, Ambassador Gazeltherim found himself excited by the prospect of change.